Hello everyone then. So I'm Paula Mountford. We've got Amanda Naylor and Heather Buchanan, and we work in the Department of Education, and we're talking today about a project, an enrichment project that we've been developing over a couple of years, working with our MA students. So what we've been doing is an enrichment experience at the end of the summer term. We put on a student-led conference, and it's a Zoom online conference where we have trained volunteer students from January, February through the months to plan, design, select and invite speakers to be keynote speakers and to run the breakout rooms. And some of the students present one of the other projects that we've been developing over the course of the year. And we do this because we were almost instinctively thinking that a conference, a Zoom conference, emerging out of that time of COVID, was going to help us to add a kind of professional and academic strand to the work that we were doing on the kind of MAs that we offer across our department. So we selected online because the first conference ran during the pandemic, and then we continued that as we came out of the pandemic, because we were thinking very much about that kind of international experience of our students and the professional skills that we might be able to develop that they could take with them and still interconnect after they'd graduated from the course. So essentially what we did is we invite volunteers and we bring them together with members of staff from within our department. And the first session was always sort of the brainstorming of what would we want the focus of the conference to be. So the first year it was learning and teaching in the time of COVID from both a student and a teacher-lecturer perspective. And last year it was a fantastic event because we got more confident with what we knew we could develop the skills in students, and we focused on the title The Future of Education, which gave us all sorts of opportunities and angles with which we could broaden our sphere of people who could come and work with us. And it also helped us you can keep connections with schools and school teachers. So we get practitioners, we invite schools to bring their students to speak via Zoom. So it means that you've got this a broad array of professionals and people involved in education that they can engage with. We also train them to work in subgroups. So you might have a facilitating group who are going to actually do the introductions, the beginnings, the openings, the endings, etc. We had a presentation group who were going to speak at the conference. We had a group that were doing the marketing and a group that was doing an evaluation. So we work together, but facilitating and supporting those different groups. And what we were intending to do was to give them a glorious experience, was one of the strands of what we wanted to do, but we also wanted to empower them in a range of ways with a range of professional skills that were going to strengthen them to go forward.
So because this was the second year that Paula primarily had done the project and Heather and I joined in last year, we thought, well, we should try and capture really what's going on here and try and kind of evidence the impact and the opportunities that the conference provided for the MA students. So we decided to do just a small piece of research on it. And these were the research questions. So one research question focused on the attendees, the participants that came, who could have been across a whole range of MA students. So what do MA student participants of the conference, the Future Education, report are their perceptions of participating in a student-led MA conference and what aspects of the conference do these students believe might have value to them? Because, of course, we believed that the conference had value. We felt that the endeavour of organising a conference, the whole kind of spectrum of inviting people, of hosting sessions, of facilitating, summarising, was useful. And also I know that the origin of this is in Paula wanting to give some co-curricular and more kind of graduate skills-based experience to the students kind of beyond the curriculum. So that was one group of students and data that we wanted to capture for the participants. And then the other group are the facilitators that were trained with us and worked with us for their separate aspects of what they'd done. So marketing was one element, facilitating groups another, evaluating another group. And what was the other one? Was marketing, evaluating?
The ones who led a session.
They led the session. So they were more involved than the participants because we had this kind of training programme and to try and encourage them to do the work, and then they went off and did the work. So the second research question is, what do MA student facilitators for the conference, the Future of Education, report of their perceptions of preparing and undertaking their role, and what aspects of this role do the student facilitators believe might have value to them? Because, of course, there's two strands, the attendees and then those who are part of making the conference happen. So ultimately, the data that we have got and that we're presenting is the online questionnaire at the end of the conference for the MA participants. So we got 39. Now this questionnaire was designed by students, and I was facilitating this evaluation group. So it's their questionnaire. It's not necessarily would be my questionnaire, it's our questionnaire because we co-created it. So the data that comes from that is from the questions that they were interested to ask, and then I was trying to enable them to capture that data through the wording of the questions. So the data from that is from the student group about the perceptions of the participants. And then we got semi-structured interviews or focus groups depending on how we kind of organised that. And we've got 10 from the student facilitators. So that's the data that we are presenting next. So from the questionnaire, one of the questions asked the participants to write 2 or 3 words to describe their most interesting session, because we had a variety of sessions. We had a keynote and then optional sessions to do with different aspects of the future of education. And I'm very proud of my word cloud that I've made here, because the bigger the word, the more a number of adjectives were attributed to that word. So obviously, education, we've got quite a lot. There's something like 8 or 9 adjectives using the word education, 8 or 9. Interesting. But I think what's interesting about the word cloud is it gives us a sense of the participants' response to what was going on. And we've got some lovely positive words like amazing and inspiring. Teachers, I guess that's positive. Help, test. And then we've got some ideas about the extension and the kind of challenge of them extending, demanding, fascinating research, technology, climate, interaction, worldwide. So coming from an adjectival word count of what they were interested in because we asked them to select their most interesting session and provide 2 or 3 adjectives to describe that session. So this gives us a kind of overview of the range of responses in the questionnaire. And then really something to give us an idea how they felt, or for them, all of us, to gather an idea of how it expanded their ideas about the future of education. And so, of course, we're very pleased that 5, the most positive responses, and so on. So those are the 2 quantitative elements of the data that we're going to present.
So I'm going to talk about the focus groups with the facilitators, which is our quantitative data. So we pulled out 4 themes It's important to say that it is a bit of a work in progress still, this, and we've done a superficial sweep of our data, and we've come up with 4 themes and extracted some quotes to show you today. So the first theme that we can show you is enjoyment and engagement. So we were really hoping that the students would enjoy this and find that it raised their levels of engagement with their programme and with their subject. And you can see from the quotes here that that definitely happened. I think the students found it was very motivating, doing something new, and I think some of them said it's a very fantastic experience for me, and I learned a lot about this. So I think that this was great for us because we wanted to think about what it kind of gave as an added value thing to our programme, that what will students learn that they weren't going to learn just on the programme. And the enjoyment and the engagement were definitely part of that. The second theme that we pulled out is communication. And it was quite interesting to see the students talking about communicating with different people of different age groups, people from different cultures as well. And I thought, well, surely students get all this in their seminars and whatever on their programmes, but apparently not so much sometimes. And I think that they really found that because they had this shared purpose of having something to organise, that it really gave them a reason to communicate effectively and authentically with other students, and also people from different programmes across the department as well. So one person talked about communicating with other organisers who were younger than them and what they'd learnt from that in terms of communication styles. But definitely they made contact and developed rapport with other people and also developed their language skills in many cases. Then we have the theme of mentoring. And so you can see in the photograph we have Louise here, who was one of the people who did a lot of mentoring with one of the presenter group, I think it was. And Louise is one of our academic skills tutors in the department. And she worked a lot with the people who were going to give presentations to kind of lead from behind, in a sense, because we were putting the onus on the students to do all the organising, and yet the support was in place for us to be able to guide and help them with that. And so, for example, participant 1 talked about how she'd given feedback on the content of somebody's presentation, which they then used as a learning thing to improve their presentation. So the responsibility was with the students, but what we realised was how important it was to put that scaffolding in to actually help them to achieve something higher and greater than what they would have done if we'd just chucked them in without any help at all. And they really valued that. And then the fourth and final theme that we pulled out was the theme of experiential learning. And one of the participants, it's not the most articulate sentence, but I thought it was quite nice. And so I saw, I know, I learn. You can see what they mean with that. And somehow, just being there and being part of it and actually doing it, learning by doing, really helped them. So it was this totally different style of learning that was important for the students, totally different from what they were getting on their programme. And they really appreciated it, and it really empowered the students to be able to go away with different kinds of skills. So moving on to our conclusions, because our time's nearly gone, we've got a few things to pull out. The first is how important community was, we realised. So this conference provided a community, and I think with the organisers among themselves were a community with the staff as well. And for international students in particular, this was really, really important, that they could feel that they belonged to this group with this shared purpose. Also different styles of learning in an experiential way rather than more of a transmission model was really important for them. And also the different kinds of skills that they came out with in terms of professional skills such as presenting or employability skills such as being able to put on a conference and organising things and project management and things like this, which we think are really important, and I think we could embed more into our curriculum actually. Then this value of supporting students to take on roles and responsibilities that maybe seem beyond them at first, but actually if we support them enough, they will be able to succeed in those. And finally, value for staff. So thinking about what we got out of it, we obviously set out to put on this student-led conference so that the students would benefit. But the three of us have worked across the department together. We've done this little research project, or almost done the research project, and we actually realised that everything that we've put into that has then been reflected back into us as well, that actually it's really important for us to think about what we have learned from this. And I think we've gained a lot by working together and also working for this shared purpose as well. So I think that can then feed back into programmes and into your own professional development and your own teaching and learning as well. I think time's gone, so I could go on a bit more, but I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? I'm not taking all the questions by myself. Does anyone have any questions? I don't know what that horrible screech is.
Yeah, where's that noise coming from? Wondering if it was my own ringing of my ears or something. Yeah.
No questions?
I just want to say I really enjoyed that, really, really interesting, and I love the co-creation aspect, and I just wondered, is this going to be an annual thing? How does it fold into the broader module structure? So you kind of, is it folded into the structure of teaching, and is it going to be regular?
We hope it hopefully is going to be a regular thing. Unfortunately, this year's couldn't take place due to a bereavement of mine, but we were all lined up. We were developing the Education for Sustainable Development Climate Crisis Conference, linked to another project that a number of the students were doing. So we were partway through, and unfortunately it couldn't this year, but it will be back on track next year, where we will work again with the students.
Because it is actually completely outside the WAM, it's completely
An extra.
Completely extra. There's no, completely.
And does that affect? I mean, does that go okay? Is it just it's just the three of you doing it?
Sometimes, it is voluntary. And it emerged from COVID, when we were teaching these students only online. We were a department who had two cohorts, we had a September cohort and a January cohort. So we all know how rock hard and complex that was. But one of the things that we all felt was you've got to make an extra dimension that connected us as humans. And we've got to use the evilness of a pandemic to actually find some good positive skills out of. So we devised it then, and then last year we ran it again, and as we said, we broadened it across. We invited all MA students to come in and get involved, because we'd seen the power of and the potential of it in the first year. So it is an extra and an enrichment, but we have a lot of MA students in our department, and across the different programmes, we have a lot of examples of enrichment events to build, because most of them are teachers or teachers from their home countries are going to go back to be teachers in their home countries. So we want to build that kind of professional skills strand that is purposeful.
Well, at some point it might be quite nice to formalise it a bit more and whatever, but it's still not got to that point yet. Thank you. Thank you. Are you on your laptop?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Steph. I'm from a team called Digital Inclusion, Skills and Creativity. who are from Library, Archives and Learning Services, which abbreviates to LALS, which is why I'm in the programme as being from Language and Linguistic Sciences. I'm not from Language and Linguistic Sciences, and if you're wondering why you've never heard of me in that department, that is why. But we have just been really busy at the moment because we had last week something called a Digital Creativity Week, which is where we get a bunch of students from around the university who all sign up to be part of this week, 9 till 4. I have to get out of bed early. And we indoctrinate these students. We kind of pour strange thoughts into their brains. And so this year it was about campus, and it was about the art collection. So we had them going to the Borthwick Archives and the Upminster Library and looking at the art collection and sort of taking all that in. And then when they've got that in, we feed them loads of digital tools and practices. So video editing, audio editing, 3D modelling, things like that. Because yesterday they had to do an exhibition. I had to present loads of art to whoever came along. So a real kind of hothouse experience, all about this idea of digital creativity. So I have a definition here of what I mean by digital creativity, and this definition is provided by my colleague Siobhan Dunlop in the same team as me, so very close to our working practice. Basically, using digital tools, digital technologies to explore creative ideas. And that can be things like looking at the art collection and bouncing off that to make your own art, but it can be working with data and your research outputs and developing interesting visualizations of that, digital storytelling, that kind of thing. And we know this works as a practice. Here's quite a lengthy bit of feedback from somebody who did this Digital Creativity Week a couple of years ago. And the kind of things that sort of crop out for me here are, this is somebody who wasn't very confident with digital technology going into it. But they were kind of reassured through the process. And by the end of it, they got an internship as a consequence of the stuff that we taught them. So this is really important. We know that employers are looking for skills involving digital technologies. But at the same time, right, the university partly is here to provide employable students, but also we're a 60s university. We're here to be thinking about having a good time and exploring ourselves, finding ourselves, finding experimentation. And so this also feeds into that vibe. It feeds into that whole criticality, that ability to ask questions of the world. And at the current state of events, AI is very popular at the moment, isn't it? It's a bit of a buzz thing. It's a lot of hype around AI. It's basically Eliza from the 1960s, just repackaged. But all the same, we were using some AI tools last year's Digital Creativity Week. Not as kind of the output in and of itself, although it could have been, but this here, several AI-generated images leading to further content. So it's shortcuts. You've only got 2 or 3 days to come up with an artwork, and so as a way of shortcutting that process, it's brilliant. But you also, there's a skill to it. You've got to think of the terminology you're going to use, the prompts that you're going to use in something like this. The same goes for the chatbots. But also, at the same time, you've got to be critical of what you get out of it as well. So there's this kind of iterative process. And actually, I'm a qualified librarian by profession, and this is what we do in our sleep. We've been doing this for years. This is information skills. If you've ever seen a librarian come into your department and start talking about search engines, it's the same thing. It's iterative approach to the prompts that you put in a search engine. It's the same thing. It's this idea of being reactive, looking at something and being able to respond to it and come up with something else. This is why in DISC we try to approach concepts rather than applications. We're an applications team. We are looking after things like the Google Suite and Microsoft Office and things like that. But we try to be application agnostic. We try to be teaching the literacies, the digital literacies, the approaches that you can take, so that if you're met with a different programme, you can work out what to do. You can work out, oh, well, it's going to be similar to that other programme, and get your way around it like that. And that's kind of reflected in our general aims and outcomes of all the stuff that we develop. Yeah, there's creativity, big word there, creativity. It comes through in things like our skills guides, which are online and open to everybody, all of that jazz. And we try to really project this ethos of creativity. It's not just about technology, it's about creative thought. It's about all those hippie ideals. It's about imagination, experimentation, curiosity, digital curiosity, questioning things. And really, what we want out of our students is that ability to question things, to explore, you know, not just in digital technologies, but also in the real world, finding doors and opening them, seeing where they go. How much of campus has never been explored? Why not? Go and have a look. Don't get sort of trod down into these sort of rules about where you're supposed to be. And so we try and spread this principle through all of the training that we do. We have a thing, for instance, called Digital Wednesdays, which is just part of the output that we have. We run it on a Wednesday afternoon. Now, Wednesday afternoon is a kind of sacred time in a way, isn't it? It's the time when you're not going to be in your timetabled lessons. It's the time when you can go and do sports or go and join a society and do something cool. So we're very aware that we're in competition with that when we're offering things on Wednesday afternoons. So we try and make stuff that is fun, that is engaging, that is a bit experimental, to try and tempt people in. So things like coding. Our Learn to Code project, that's the first time actually we've really got a significant proportion of people from a science background who are going, oh, yeah, I need to use R in biology. I want to go and learn about it and that kind of thing. But we do things like that. We do that every year. We do more creative stuff, more sort of explicitly creative stuff. Like, we got a load of students during lockdown to create a digital escape room using various tools. PowerPoint, spreadsheets, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Not just the kind of more sort of one-off tools that you might think of. Also, a session about creating a digital self-portrait. And that wasn't just getting a graphics program or using an AI tool that worked with your face. That was thinking more abstractly. So thinking about your movements and what's being tracked, thinking about your Netflix viewing history and what we can create out of those more abstract data sets. That's something we try and do with a lot of departments and things as well. We had a session this year, Digital Creativity Strand, that kind of based on the things that we do in the Digital Creativity Week, but compressed a bit. So, for instance, I went out and played the avocado and recorded it, and then we put together a piece of music. And again, we're doing things with games and stuff. Not everything we do is entirely successful, and I will hold my hands up and confess to that. So, for instance, this term we did a thing called Digital Wednesdays Unplugged, where the aim was to stealthily get across digital ideas in an arty kind of way. So we had knitting and sewing and collage as a kind of, come and relax, but actually we're stealthily going to teach you about digital technologies while you're doing it. But not many people came. And I think part of that was how we advertised it, and maybe we didn't reach that audience in an appropriate way, maybe the timing of it as well. We thought, you know, people probably going to be revising for exams, we'll target them with knitting at that point, but then maybe knitting seems a bit frivolous, so maybe you think, oh, well, maybe I should just be revising instead of knitting. So maybe that wasn't well timed, but we'll look into it. We'll probably try it again. But that idea of doing things by stealth, we try and make things fun as much as we possibly can. But we also try to get things by stealth by just sneaking into other parts of our programme. So I've shown you things that are explicitly creativity badged. But even things like our critical reading stuff or our searching literature stuff, we try and get creative aspects into that. We work with departments as well. So sometimes that's very explicit. So we might I was doing a session about posters with health sciences the other week. We have a session, social policy and social work session involving video editing, and we've done things like that with careers as well. I do a thing with history where we've got some very dry spreadsheets, numbers of advertising costs from the 1940s. And then the students have to work with those and create weird and wonderful data visualizations out of it as a way of communicating it. So there's always some way that we can cram some creative or critical thought through aspect to these things, a little bit of adventure. So that's something we try to do. And that extends as well to a new thing that we brought in this year. So in the library now, there are 2 rooms in the Fairhurst building that are labs. We've got the Creativity Lab, which is a kind of input space. We've got 3D scanners that look like irons, and you can wave them at things, and then those objects somehow magically get into a computer. It's weird. And we've got 3D modelling kit. We've got all sorts of powerful computers with huge bendy monitors that glow in the dark and make pretty colours, with like the Adobe suite and things. So you can do all sorts of 3D modelling, virtual reality. You know, we've got a headset out there in the hall at the moment as well. All that kind of thing. There's even a podcasting lab. And then we've got our output lab, Your Create, which is, at the moment, it's basically just a series of 3D printers. But we've got some crafting stuff in there and an ambition to have some more crafting materials in there eventually. And anyone can use these. Anyone can come along and use them. We have an induction for the 3D printers, but once you've done that, you can print stuff for free. Anybody, any member of the university. We can work with departments on that. We can just have individuals coming along. And again, we're getting a group of students coming along to that would never have come to any of our other stuff. We've always kind of wanted to attract those students that don't really see the value in that kind of added sessions, those kind of bonus sessions that we offer. Because they think, oh, well, I don't really need to know that. I'm going to go to the pub or whatever. But we start to attract some of those when we do weird and wonderful things like 3D printing. So having these, it's allowing us to extend those critical thoughts, those creative ideas, those digital literacies that we're wanting to empower students with, so that they can go out and get a job, but also have a cool life as well, and be able to work with whatever gets thrown at them, and start to reimagine the world from different angles, start to think outside of that box and explore new ideas. And again, this is a kind of plug as well, because we can work together with other members of the university to do this. We can bring our sort of collective heads together and find creative ways of generating these thoughts, these ideas, and into the minds of students. It's very exciting. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to throw at you today. Some of these creative things. But yeah, thank you. Any questions?
Can we bring a group of students to these funky rooms in the library?
Absolutely, yeah. If you get in touch with us, if you go under the skills guides, there's contact details. But we're out there as well in the hall. Yeah.
I work on the Inclusive Learning team and we're running a longitudinal study for the award gap. And one of the things our participants have said they want to do something creative. So we're looking at Lego play.
Oh yeah.
But actually, I wonder, they're not a massive group, and I wonder if we could maybe think about bringing them to a session with your wonderful creative things.
Absolutely.
I don't know what, but something like that.
Yeah, sure. And we also have some Lego
Do you have?
Yeah, we've got some of the programmable stuff.
Yeah.
So you can code with. But yeah, absolutely. That's it.
So just reach out to you guys through.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, or drop a line to us at IT support at york.ac.uk, mark it for retention of disk, and it will come to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that you do some coding with your students. That's really interesting. Do you teach them as a lesson where you test them as well, or it's just for something that they just learn and just to get to know how to do coding?
Yeah, with the student sessions for coding, because we do them online, most of the stuff that we do, they're quite transmissive. But we have a sort of coding environment in the Google Colab notebook. So that's got some exercises in it with kind of prompts and potential answers and things. So in that regard, they can sort of test themselves. Ideally, we want to do more face-to-face stuff like that, but at the moment, just the scale of it makes it more sensible to do it online.
And do you find the students are quite interested in doing coding and to see something that they
Yeah, and I think because coding sounds like the sort of thing that they think that they're going to need anyway, that brings people through the door. Definitely, it's one of those buzzwords that you put coding in it, and suddenly you've got a load of people there. So yeah, I think
interesting. Good.
Yeah, thank you. It's quite interesting that you're giving students room to be creative. And I was just going to think you have some categories of things that you could do to make it creative. I was just wondering if you had, I don't know, if you had room for some crazy out-of-the-box ideas that could just come from the blues and looks like it's not possible. Do you have provisions for guiding our students through such things?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the Digital Creativity Week, for instance, that we just had, it's very much a sort of open thing. We want some artistic output, but what you do is kind of up to you. We have a bit of a pitch and we try and control them and say, well, you're not going to get that done in 4 days, but other than that, we'll be there to support them and get them to do things. I mean, we also have some online resources to go with this, so the skills guides and all of that. We actually have a specific digital creativity practical guide that has some hints and advice as well in terms of getting digital creativity in other aspects of stuff. But yeah, a bit of guidance, but not too heavy. I think we've probably had about 5 minutes of questions there, so we should probably...
Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is talking to you about the importance of the learning environment in the student journey, and in particular the role of music. I'm Sally Beckenham. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Environment and Geography, so a little bit different to the kinds of things I usually engage with. And the aim is really, as it sort of suggests, to highlight the role that music can play in enhancing the learning environment, in particular for disciplines, for modules and courses that don't usually engage with music. So I'm not speaking to sorts of modules that are already using kind of creative content. And this is derived from a survey of literature on the how music is involved in higher education, in particular learning environments. And to be honest, it's pretty light. Surveying the literature is pretty light on that score. Lots of it is about primary and secondary education, little to nothing about how music is used in environment and geography subjects, and in particular, and social science subjects more widely, I should say. I'll also sort of fold in some findings of my own experience, in particular teaching on a module called International Relations of Southeast Asia, or ERSI, which I was leading at Chiang Mai University in Thailand for about 5 years before coming to York. And in that module, I started to gradually fold music in, because I started to see some really amazing results. And I think there could be some really interesting dialogue with what you've just been talking about as well. So I'll talk briefly about the importance of the learning environment for a student's journey, just tying into the conference theme. The role of music in enhancing the learning environment, and then You Can Call Me Al and the accidental student choice model. 10 points for anybody who is familiar with You Can Call Me Al. And we will be listening to it in a little bit, so that's good for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. And You Can Call Me Al as a song is what got me into all of this, and I'll explain why. And then I'll talk about music during sessions and some considerations. Just also to say as well that this is ongoing research, and I'm not just here to encourage us to think about how we can use music in practice, but also as a sort of plea, because I'm really interested to know how, if at all, anybody else is using it, different mechanisms, super creative mechanisms, digitally maybe, and also how it connects to particular disciplines, because as I said, environment and geography and kind of global development, which is my background, just doesn't really engage in any way. Okay, so there's different ways we can define a learning environment, and I won't go into all of them. I subscribe to this idea that it's a co-created space, so the experiences and expectations of the space are sort of forged together between students and the facilitator. And it's a physical, social, cultural and educational space. So we're not just talking when students walk into a classroom about a physical space with chairs and tables. It's a culture that's created there. It is imbued with norms, shared expectations and values, a pedagogy, a pedagogical approach, and an atmosphere is created. And it is really, really important for motivation and engagement and also achievement. And there are many studies that show the ways in which learning environments are significant for students for a range of factors, from contentment with course of study, quality of life, well-being, and so on. So it's really, really important, basically. And the challenge that's posed to traditional learning environments derives from this more nuanced understanding of learning environments, right? So what they are, and really more importantly, what they can be. The idea is that the critique, I suppose, of the banking mode of education, which you might be familiar with, pouring ideas into people's heads, which is depicted nicely here by Marcella Thuram in this image here. I don't know if you can see it, but this person is saying if it's not orange, it's not real, because they're being told what to think. The critique of this mode of education is on the basis that it can stifle creativity and a sense of agency and a sense of empowerment. It can be boring and therefore disengaging as well. So what we want is obviously the opposite. We want to foster agency, the freedom, the ability and desire at any given point in time to act independently, to affect change in the internal or external environment. That's what you want students to be thinking. So the question is obviously how we create a learning environment that fosters agency. This is a question I asked students in that course I was talking about, ERSI, International Relations of Southeast Asia, and it was actually just an icebreaker. So it was just a little game, asking students, trying to help students to get to know each other by asking them to think about what they would not want to see when they walk in the room that we're going to be creating, and what they would want to see, and this is our beloved word cloud of these responses. And what really stood out to me is the sort of sensory nature of some of these responses. So we have cold, quiet, as a sort of what we don't want, versus things like warm, laughter, good energy, good vibe, love that, good vibes only. So, and so that's probably not surprising. We wouldn't probably expect that we want to walk into a kind of tense environment. But what basically emerges out of this is this, what I think this also provides is a good sense, this kind of breakdown of this boundaried space of the learning environment, whereby what we want is that students already feel this way and walk into the space where they're going to learn and bring that in with them, rather than feeling like they get to this door and they're having a good time and feeling happy, and then they walk in and they're, oh God, now I've got to get my gym, I'm going to be, that's too scary, the professor's not very nice, and so on. So, and there's different studies looking at different ways to improve and enhance the learning environment, which we can't get into, but obviously the one I'm interested in is the role of music. So studies show that music activates specific areas of the brain and alters emotional states. And the emotional state of a learner has a real impact on how well people learn. So that students remember not just what they learnt, but how they felt when they learnt it. And we might all have memories of learning, and in part that might be because we remember how we felt. And that might not be just at uni, it might be learning from a grandparent and remembering how good it felt when they said, you're doing well, or whatever, right? So how you feel when you're learning is really important. So this question is, how can music be used as a positive mood setter, so the good vibes, but in a way that can help develop student agency, the antithesis of the banking mode of education? Yes. Okay, just bear with me. I'm not going to play the whole song, don't worry, we'll sit here for it's a 4-minute song. And there could have been a more sophisticated way to do that other than on my phone, I'm sure. Okay, that leads me on to the You Can Call Me Al thing. So, teaching this course, this ERSI course, a few years ago, I walked into the lecture theatre. I was late, well, I wasn't really late, I was sort of right on time, and the students were unusually enthusiastic, so they were all mostly there. And I was listening to You Can Call Me Al by Paul Simon on my headphones. And the students said, what are you listening to? I told them they'd not heard it. So they said, can they listen to it? I said, sure. We played the song while I faffed around with the PowerPoint. And really amazingly, we got into a huge discussion about that song in particular, the politics around the Graceland album. And that went on for a while, and I started to go, okay, we should probably get on to the actual content. But because we were teaching, it was a international politics course anyway, it actually fed really neatly into what I had planned to talk about. And one thing kind of led to another. And as a sort of joke, they started saying, okay, what's the entrance music going to be for next session? And that's what happened from there. We actually did start having entrance music. Not as a kind of like rocky thing where I walked in, like bigging me up, but in the reverse. So for students to walk in. So I made an effort to get there early, and students would file in to music. So they would feel, hopefully, like that rocky thing where they're walking into some match and they're going to be brilliant. Students started turning up to class earlier, making requests. We started to have really interesting discussions based around the songs. Bonds were starting to form. I saw it as a sort of natural icebreaker, actually, that hadn't been a sort of forced game, like tell me something surprising about yourself or whatever. The next semester I did this again, but made it a student choice system. Students were able to make suggestions on a Google Doc, but that led to too many suggestions, concerns about people who didn't get their songs picked, and songs I wasn't sure about playing, songs I wasn't very familiar with, and I thought, what if these lyrics are crazy? So then they became, the third iteration was a student choice system based on voting for a pre-selected list. So that became, so there's some surprising results, and these are sort of detail, and these are sort of the headlines. Attendance was mandatory for this course, but there were no late penalties after the third week, compared to an average of 7 previously. 80% of the students said they'd be very likely to remember this course. Previously, it was 68%. 65% of students mentioned the entrance music as one of their favourite aspects of the course, which I don't know what it says about the rest of the content, but and asked why it was these themes again, which connect to sort of, that word cloud I showed about what they wanted in a learning environment, which was really interesting. How far do you agree that the course gave you a sense of agency? 64% that said they strongly agree. Slight caveat that this was actually one of the learning outcomes, because we did other things to try and we made this really central. But that was a part of it because it was another way in which they were they were empowered in a small way to affect their learning environment. They even created International Relations of Southeast Asia soundtrack, which was amazing. And I still have it, and I think really fondly of it. And the songs on it, I'm transported back to that learning environment that we co-created together. And it was all because of You Can Call Me Al. So. And I learned a lot as well from them in conversations that the songs fostered. So these are sort of the headlines. It made the course memorable, it created a nice learning environment, fostered a sense of agency, and there was two-way learning. Okay, so I started to explore other things to do apart from entrance music, and that's how I started getting into this sort of survey of the literature. I found that the playing of classical music during lectures influences students' perceptions of their learning environment and impacts their academic outcomes, and there's various studies about this. That's just one of them. So I started to look at this, and I didn't necessarily want to start playing Chopin during the whole lecture, but what I did was I fed it into sort of brainstorming exercises that I was already doing, so group work. So I have a group work that I do called World Cafe, where I put students in groups. They move around the room. It's nothing particularly amazing, but I usually put up a picture of Paris on the PowerPoint and say, imagine you're here, imagine you're, on the left bank, sipping a coffee, chatting, imagine you're in Paris, and I put it on cafe sounds on the speakers, so they really fit. I said, imagine there's tablecloths, and just imagine you're in a sort of different environment, and your ideas are free-flowing, and you're thinking about things other than what we've been told to think about. I started introducing music in different ways, and I've to interesting effect. Some considerations just to end with. I think it's a really subtle but effective way to influence the learning environment, which we know is really important. Music can be liberating. It can make people feel a bit more relaxed, especially when they're sort of entering a space. And so therefore it's a nice way to think about how we can change this sort of rigidity of traditional teaching styles. There's some things that we'd want to be aware of, which I won't read them all, but you can see them here. One of these is that music is actually also quite repressive, and so it can be quite repressive. When I was living in Thailand, teaching in Thailand, the people have to stand for the national anthem. It's played twice a day, every day. So my Thai students would sometimes say it's not always the case that music is this great emancipatory thing. But yeah, I'll leave it there and invite any questions and thoughts on how you all use it too. Thank you. Any questions?
That was really, really good and really interesting, thank you. In a previous life, I was a school history teacher, and then I was a teacher trainer here at York as well. And one of the things that we did with training history teachers was help them to compile song lists that they could use in their classrooms, linked to specific topics in the school curriculum. So I've tried it with students, but it was students for a purpose to think of using it with school students. Now I work with MA students in an international context, but you've given me great inspiration because we're thinking about our induction sessions, our glorious extra weeks we've got on modularisation.
Yeah.
And this, I'm very inspired by what you've done. I can't commit to an opening song every week. But I think we could take some inspiration from it and think about how we're using music, like you say, that icebreaker of something different, something fun, something engaging, and there's something international and connected. So that was lovely. Thank you very much.
I'm glad, and I agree. It's sometimes it seems so different and a bit bizarre, and then you think it's just music. but it's often not used. You just walk into a silent classroom and you learn in silence. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it just sort of made me think of ways in which I use music with my 4-year-old to get her to do things like she won't tidy up, but if I put on the tidy up time music.
Oh my God! Please tell me, because my 2-year-old kid, my 2-year-old's a bit younger, but I'm happy to sort of indoctrinate him in through music.
Well, any song you call it tidy up music, but Flight the Bumblebee is quite good for getting moving really fast.
Definitely going to take that for those things. Tidy up music, that's brilliant.
But I guess it's sort of a similar thing in that music is a motivation to do something or to feel a little bit more engaged with something that you sort of have to do.
And it's sort of a disruptor, right? Something that takes you out of what you think is just going to be the same old, same old.
Yeah, it's weird how we don't really think of music in the classroom, but you have music playing in a restaurant, or you'll have music, in the background, all sorts of occasions, just to sort of, we don't even think about it. But, and obviously, a lot of like studying playlists are really big now. On YouTube, people just stick on a 5-hour studying playlist, but nobody hasn't quite caught up in terms of actual structured teaching, trying to include it. So, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to know how music can motivate. I know that when I enter in the kitchen, when I want to, I'm not a very good cook, but I normally have a particular music. So when I put it on, I find myself really concentrated without thinking, when am I finishing to get out of this kitchen. So it's just one music. And once I put it on, I find myself just working and washing and very without thinking, without rushing, and then yes, it's a way of motivating ourselves to do something, and if we get up, it depends on which type as well what you are doing.
So one of the considerations actually is that not everybody will share the same taste in music. So and that did come up. It was a really international group of students I was dealing with. So Thai students from Vietnam, Burma, and in the US. So that in itself was quite an interesting discussion. And it didn't happen in my situation, but there'd be a consideration to make sure everybody feels like all types of music are okay. And you'll just have to put up with it if you don't like it that 1 week, I guess. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So my kind of links to yours, that I'm from an early years childhood education background, and I use music all the time to kind of influence how they played, whether they wanted them to concentrate and play really, gently, or whether I wanted more exciting play. I'd use it all the time, but I'm new to HE, so it's really interesting to see how you're using it in HE. But I am just interested in how you maybe introduce this when you maybe have students who are maybe autistic or have sort of triggers. I don't know how you
and that's what. Yeah, again, that's something that needs to be considered quite carefully. I didn't have autistic students or students with special needs, but I think there would need to be a really good open dialogue at the beginning about people's needs, people's triggers. One thing that did occur to me is if people had a particular song that they really don't want to hear because it takes them to a particular place they don't want to be transported back to. So I think what that requires is a big discussion about what we'll create. So sort of talking about where that word cloud came from was an ice-breaking session where we said, what are we going to create? What kind of space are we going to have? Which I know is also used in schools and things. And I think in that discussion needs to be what can people handle and not handle, and let's be considerate of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because from that discussion maybe you might find out that they have songs that they do like.
Yeah.
So maybe you could kind of select from that song.
Yeah. This had students chatting loads afterwards. They'd wander out and go, oh, what would you choose? So I also felt like it bonded people too, because naturally people start talking about their favourite bands and so on.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting for me. Just because of the story of my PhD thesis. When I was, as an engineer in the department of, computer or something like this. Normally, students focus on something very deeply about technical or mathematics. But I had one experience in my PhD. So our office, our department was so quiet, and so sometimes really after studying or coding, I feel sleepy. So when I started, sometimes not that English music, but Persian music, and I started. So I think my mind started to just again thinking better. So I don't know if you have any experience about the in technical or engineering faculty. So how would be possible to get more, let's say, learning outcome? And this is, I think, it happened and helped me when I was just doing some AI and coding, sometimes reading, sometimes like this situation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I sort of, as I said at the beginning, there's very little about that I can see about this being used by faculty, and quite frankly, knowing my colleagues, this won't catch on because it feels sometimes a bit too bold, and everybody's focused on the content, and we're all brains exploding with workload, especially if we're putting conferences on as well, and I think it feels like something sort of a step beyond. But I would really like to have these discussions about how it can change other, not just classrooms, but other spaces too.
Yeah, like laboratory, something different from the theoretical class. So how would be the impact of the music in the laboratory?
And we've had feedback on so I run the BA Human Geography program. Remember that. And the feedback is that there's they want a better sense of community, and there's, again, you can think about what we could do there with music in our sort of shared space we have in our department as well. So yeah, no, definitely there's scope for. It's not even that radical to say we could use music, but it kind of feels radical to some old schoolers,